So Andrei and Rose are starting to read Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and this set in written has a surprise. My father's students agreed to read the next chapters after me. So now I'm reading the first chapter called Chapter 1, The Riddle House. The villagers of Little Hingleton still called it the Riddle House, even though it had been many years since the Riddle family had lived there. It stood on a hill overlooking the village. Some of its windows boarded, tiles missing from its roof, and ivy spreading and cracked and cheeked over its roof. One time-looking manor, and easily the largest and grandest building for miles around. The Riddle House was now damp, derelict, and unoccupied. The little Hingleton all agreed that the old house was creepy. Half a century ago, something strange and horrible had happened there, something that the older inhabitants of the village still liked to discuss when topics for gossip were scary. The story had been picked over so many times and had been embroidered in so many places that nobody was quite sure what the truth was anymore. Any version of the tale, however, started in the same place. 50 years before, at daybreak on a fine summer's morning, when the Riddle House had still been well kept and impressive, and a maid had entered the drawing room to find all three riddles dead. The maid had ran screaming down the hill into the village and roused as many people as she could. Lying there with their eyes open, wide open, cold as ice, still in their dinner things. The police were summoned, and the whole of Little Hingleton had seethed with shocked curiosity and ill-disguised excitement. Nobody wasted their breath pretending to feel very sad about the riddles, for they had been most unpopular. Actually, Mr. and Mrs. Riddle had been rich, snobbish, and rude, and their grown-up son, Tom, had been even more so. All the villagers cared about what they identify of the murderer plainly. Three apparently healthy people did not all drop dead of natural causes on the same night. The hanged man, the village pub, did a roaring trade last night. The whole village had turned out to discuss the murders. They were rewarded for leaving their firesides when the riddles cook arrived dramatically in their midst and announced to the summoned silent club that a man called Frank Bryce had just been arrested. "Frank!" cried several people. "Never! Frank Bryce was the Riddle's gardener. He lived alone in a rundown cottage in the Riddle House grounds. Frank had come back from work with a very stiff leg and great dislike of crowds and loud noises, and had been working for the riddles ever since. There was a rush to buy the cook things and to hear more details. Also thought he was odd," she told the carefully listening villagers after her fourth sherry. "Friendly, like, I'm sure I've offered him a cup once. I've ordered it 100 times. Never wanted to mix, he didn't." Now," said a woman at the bar. "He had a hard war. Frank, he likes the quiet life. That's no reason to..." "Who else had a key to the back door then?" bugged the cook. "There's been a spare key hanging on the garden's cottage for back as I can remember. Nobody forced the door last night. No problem, no broken windows. All Frank had to do was creep up to the big house while we were all sleeping." The villagers exchanged dark looks. "I always thought he had a nasty look about him, right enough," grunted the man at the bar. "War turned to him funny, if you ask me," said the landlord. "Told you I wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of Frank, did I?" "Duh," said an excited woman in the corner. "Horrible temper," said Dot, nodding fervently. "I remember when he was a kid." But the following morning, hardly anybody in Little Hingleton doubted that Frank Bryce had killed the riddles. But over in the neighboring town of Great Hingleton, the dark and Frank was stubbornly repeating again and again that he was innocent, and that the only person he had near the house with the day of Riddle's death had been a teenage boy, a stranger, dark-haired and pale. Nobody else in the village had seen any such boy, and the police were quite sure that Frank had abandoned him. Then, just when the things were looking very serious for Frank, the report of the Riddle's bodies came back and changed everything. The police had never read an older report. A team of doctors had examined the bodies and had concluded that none of the Riddles had been poisoned, stabbed, shot, strangled, suffocated, or, as far as they could tell, harmed at all. In fact, the report continued in a tone of unmistakable bewilderment. The Riddles all appeared to be in perfect health, apart from the fact that they were all dead. Doctors did note, as though determined to find something wrong with the bodies, that each of the Riddles had look of terror upon his or her face. But as the frustrated police said, whoever heard of 3 people being frightened to death, and as there was no proof that the Riddles had been murdered at all, the police were forced to let Frank go. The Riddles were buried in the little Hangleton churchyard, and their graves remained objects of curiosity for a while. To everyone's surprise, and amidst a cloud of suspicion, Frank Bryce returned to his cottage in the grounds of the Riddle House. As far as I'm concerned, he killed them, and I don't care what the police say, said Dodd in the Hanging Man. And if he had any destiny, he'd leave here, knowing as how we know he did it. But Frank did not leave. He stayed to tend the garden for the next family who lived in the Riddle House, and then next, for another family stayed long. Perhaps it was partly because of Frank that each new owner said there was a nasty feeling about the place, which, in the absence of inhabitants, started to fall into despair. The wealthy man who owned the Riddle House there these days neither lived there nor put it to any use. They said in the village that he'd kept it for tax reasons, though nobody was very clear that this night might be. The wealthy owner continued to pay Frank to do the gardening, however. Frank was nearing his 77th birthday now, very deaf. His back led stiffer than ever, but could be seen pottering around the flower beds in fine weather, even though the weeds were starting to creep up on him. Weeds were not the only thing Frank had to contend with either. Boys from the village made a habit of throwing stones through the windows in the Riddle House. They rode their bicycles over the lawns Frank worked so hard to keep smooth. Once or twice they broke into the old house for a dare. They knew that old Frank was devoted to the house and grounds, and it amused them to see him limping across the garden, Brahms flourishing his stick and yelling croakily at them. Frank, on this part, believed the boys tormented him because they, like their new parents and grandparents, thought him a murderer. So when Frank awoke one night in August and saw something very odd up at the old house, he merely assumed that the boys had gone one step further in their attempts to punish him. It was Frank's bad luck that woke him. It was paining him worse than ever in his old age. He got up and limped downstairs into the kitchen with the idea of fulfilling his hot water bottle to ease the stiffness in his knee. Standing at the sink, filling his kettle, he looked up at the Riddle House and saw lights glimmering in its upper windows. Francis knew at once what was going on. The boys had broken into the house again, and judging by the flickering quality of the light, they had started a fire. Frank had no telephone, and in any case, he had deeply mistrusted the police ever since they had taken him in for questioning about the Riddle's deaths. He put down the kettle at once and hurried back upstairs as fast as his bad leg would allow, and was sent back into the kitchen, fully dressed and removing a rusty old key from his hook by the door. He picked up his walking stick, which was propped against the wall, and set off into the night. The front door of the Riddle House bore no sign of being forced, and nor did any of the windows. Frank leaped around to the back of the house until he reached a door almost completely hidden by ivy. He took out the old key, put it into the lock, and opened the door noiselessly. He had left himself into the cavernous kitchen. Frank had not entered it for many years. Nevertheless, although it was very dark, he remembered where the door into the hall was as he dropped his way towards it. His nostrils full of smell of decay, cars pricked up for any sound of footsteps or voices from overhead. He reached the hall, which was a little lighter owing to the large mullioned windows either side of the front door, and started to climb the stairs, blessing the dust which would leak upon the stone, because it muffled the sound of his feet and stick.